The first thing Julie Johnson noticed when she walked through the gates of Fort Anderson wasn't what had changed. It was what hadn't. The flag still rose over the headquarters building before sunrise. The smell of wet grass still mixed with diesel from the motor pool. Young soldiers still hurried across the parade ground carrying more confidence than experience, trying not to look nervous while pretending they knew exactly where they were going. She smiled to herself. 20 years had passed since she'd first marched across this same pavement as a young lieutenant with polished boots and a head full of plans. Back then, she believed hard work and determination could solve nearly every problem. Life, and several combat deployments, had taught her otherwise. These days she understood something much simpler. The hardest battles were usually fought long before the first shot was fired. That was why she had come back. Not to wear medals, not to tell war stories, and certainly not to relive the years she'd spent overseas. She had returned because someone had once invested their time in teaching her lessons that no textbook ever could. Now it was her turn. A young corporal standing outside the administration building noticed her approaching. "Ma'am?" Julie stopped. "Yes? You here for the instructor orientation?" "I am." He looked down at the paperwork in his hands. "Captain Julie Johnson." "That's me." His eyes widened for just a second. "I read your service record while processing arrivals." Julie laughed softly. "I hope they left out the embarrassing parts." The corporal grinned. "They mostly listed awards." "They always do." He hesitated. "My older brother served in Afghanistan. He always said the people with the biggest ribbons usually talked about them the least." Julie nodded. "Your brother sounds like someone worth listening to." She thanked him, picked up her visitor packet, and continued toward the training headquarters. Inside, framed photographs covered the hallway walls. Entire generations of instructors stared back from faded black and white portraits and crisp, modern photographs. Faces changed, uniforms changed, equipment changed, the expressions never did. Responsibility looked the same in every decade. Colonel David Harris welcomed the newly assigned instructors in a modest conference room overlooking the obstacle course. Most of the instructors were in their early 30s. Julie immediately noticed she was one of the few who had spent significant time outside the Army after retiring from active service. Harris finished introducing everyone before turning toward her. And finally, Captain Julie Johnson. Combat veteran, former company commander, recipient of multiple commendations, and someone with enough field experience that I'd be wasting everyone's time trying to summarize it. Julie shifted slightly in her chair. I'd rather the recruits never hear that introduction. The room chuckled. Colonel Harris smiled. "Why?" "Because the day they start believing my resume instead of judging my instruction is the day I've failed." That answer earned a few approving nods. Others looked unconvinced, especially the young officer sitting near the end of the table. First Lieutenant Ethan Mercer, perfectly pressed uniform, immaculate haircut, confident posture. Julie recognized the type immediately. Not arrogant exactly, just convinced that the newest answer was automatically the best one. After the meeting ended, Mercer approached while the others gathered their notebooks. "Captain Johnson?" She turned. "Lieutenant, I've heard impressive things about your service." "Thank you." He smiled politely. "I hope you don't mind if I ask something." "Go ahead." "Do you think experience sometimes makes instructors resistant to change?" Julie considered the question. "Sometimes." "So we're in agreement." "Not quite." Mercer folded his arms. "I think modern soldiers need modern methods." "So do I." He blinked. "I wasn't expecting that answer." Julie smiled. "The Army should never stop improving." "Exactly. But improvement isn't the same thing as replacement." Mercer's smile faded just enough to reveal disappointment. "I'm not sure I follow." She looked through the window toward recruits beginning morning physical training. Maps became GPS. Yes. Letters became encrypted communication. Correct. Horses became helicopters. He laughed. "I see your point." "But," Julie let the word hang in the air, "if your GPS dies, can you still find your objective?" Mercer answered immediately. We carry backups. If those fail, he paused. Equipment rarely all fails simultaneously. Julie nodded. It rarely does. Then she smiled kindly. But soldiers don't train for what usually happens. She picked up her notebook. They train for the day everything goes wrong. Without another word, she walked toward the door. Mercer remained standing. His expression wasn't angry. It was thoughtful. Julie met her platoon of recruits the following morning. 32 young men and women. Different states, different backgrounds, different reasons for joining. One wanted college money. Another came from a family with 4 generations of military service. One recruit admitted he'd simply wanted a challenge. Julie introduced herself with surprising brevity. My name is Julie Johnson. She looked around the formation. You've already read my file. A few nodded. Forget it. Several recruits exchanged confused glances. My past won't help you pass tomorrow's evaluation. She began walking slowly in front of them. You don't need to impress me. She stopped. You need to become the kind of soldier others trust when life becomes complicated. One recruit raised his hand. Ma'am, go ahead. I heard you served overseas several times. I did. Are you going to teach us what combat was really like? Julie looked at him for a long moment. No. The answer surprised everyone. Instead, she continued. I'm going to teach you how to make good decisions before combat ever starts. Another recruit frowned. Isn't shooting kind of the important part? A ripple of quiet laughter spread through the formation. Julie smiled. Shooting matters. She pointed toward the barracks. So does sleeping. Confused silence. So does cleaning your equipment. Still silence. So does drinking enough water. Someone quietly laughed. And knowing your teammate's first name. Now the recruits looked puzzled. Julie folded her hands behind her back. People imagine war as explosions. She shook her head. War is mostly small decisions. She looked each recruit in the eyes. Thousands of them. Later that week, instructors gathered to observe one another's training sessions. Mercer demonstrated the Army's newest battlefield simulation system. Large digital displays projected terrain maps across classroom walls. Recruits wore virtual reality headsets while drones transmitted live information into the exercise. The presentation was polished, professional, highly impressive. Julie watched quietly from the back. The recruits loved it. Afterward, several gathered around Mercer asking technical questions. Julie congratulated him sincerely. Excellent presentation. He smiled. I appreciate that. Then he added carefully, I hope you'll consider incorporating more of this technology. I probably will. His eyebrows lifted. I thought you preferred traditional methods. I prefer useful methods. For a brief moment, they understood each other. Then Mercer noticed her afternoon schedule posted on the wall. Field navigation, compass work, terrain association, manual route planning. His smile disappeared. You still dedicate an entire afternoon to compass navigation? I do. We issue GPS to every squad. Julie nodded. And batteries never die? He sighed. Captain, with respect, that's becoming less relevant every year. Maybe. He looked genuinely confused. Then why keep teaching it? Julie didn't answer. Instead, she invited him to observe the afternoon exercise. Rain arrived shortly after lunch. Not a storm. Just enough to turn the forest trails slick with mud. Julie intentionally avoided the easiest routes. The recruits complained quietly while climbing wet hills with heavy rucksacks. Several reached instinctively for the handheld navigation devices they had been issued. Julie shook her head. Leave them off. One recruit groaned. Seriously? Seriously. Another asked, what's the point if we'll never navigate like this? Julie simply replied, you don't know that. For nearly 3 hours, they learned to identify terrain using ridgelines, streams, tree lines, and elevation changes. It felt slow, old-fashioned. Several recruits clearly believed they were wasting valuable training time. Watching from a nearby trail, Mercer scribbled notes onto his evaluation clipboard. His opinion seemed obvious, outdated. Eventually, Julie gathered everyone at a clearing. She pointed toward a distant hill. "Your objective is there." One recruit activated his GPS anyway. The screen remained black. He frowned. "No signal." Another checked hers. Nothing. Mercer looked down at his own device. Also blank. Julie had arranged the exercise inside a training area where satellite reception frequently disappeared beneath dense terrain. Not because of malfunction, but because the landscape itself interfered. The recruits suddenly looked much less confident. Julie calmly unfolded a paper map. "All right," she smiled. "Now let's continue." For the next hour, the platoon reached the objective using nothing more than maps, compasses, observation, and teamwork. They arrived tired, muddy, and smiling. Mercer said nothing during the walk back. That evening, after the recruits had returned to the barracks, Mercer submitted his observation report. His comments praised Julie's professionalism. He acknowledged her discipline. He recognized the recruit's strong performance. But he also wrote one sentence that lingered in his mind long after he left his office. "Captain Johnson demonstrates exceptional experience, but her instructional philosophy appears increasingly disconnected from the direction of today's Army." When he clicked submit, he believed he was helping improve the training program. He had no idea that the report would be the first small stone in a much larger avalanche. And Julie, locking the lights in her classroom before heading home, had not yet realized that someone had quietly decided she no longer belonged there. Julie arrived before sunrise every morning. She liked the quiet hour before the base came alive. The hallways were empty, the coffee was fresh, and for a little while there were no schedules, inspections, or questions waiting for her. She spread maps across her desk, reviewed the day's exercises, and made notes in a weathered green notebook she'd carried since her final deployment. Inside were not tactics or regulations. They were observations. People stop listening when they're exhausted. Fear makes smart people forget simple things. Confidence grows after small victories. Years of experience had filled every page. She wasn't trying to teach recruits how to fight. She was trying to teach them how to think. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Colonel David Harris stepped inside. "Morning, Julie." She stood. "Morning, Colonel." He held a thin folder in his hand. "I've got some paperwork." Julie smiled. "The Army never changes." He chuckled, but only briefly. "There'll be an instructional review next week." Julie wasn't surprised. Every instructor was reviewed eventually. "No problem," he hesitated. "And they'll probably observe more than one class." That was unusual. "Anything specific they're looking for?" "Officially, training effectiveness." "And unofficially?" Harris looked toward the hallway before lowering his voice. "There have been questions." Julie leaned against her desk. "About me?" He nodded. "I wish I could tell you more." She studied his expression. He wasn't accusing her of anything. If anything, he looked uncomfortable. "I appreciate the warning. I figured you'd rather hear it from me than be surprised." After he left, Julie sat quietly for a moment. Questions. The Army asked questions all the time. That alone didn't concern her. What concerned her was how suddenly those questions had appeared. Training continued as planned. The recruits had moved beyond basic drills and were beginning to work in fire teams. Julie watched carefully but rarely interrupted. She believed mistakes made during training, provided they were safe, became lessons soldiers never forgot. During one exercise, recruit Nolan rushed ahead without communicating. His team became separated within minutes. Julie blew her whistle. "Freeze!" Everyone stopped. She walked over calmly. "Nolan." "Ma'am." "What happened?" "I thought I saw a faster route." "You did." He nodded confidently. "So why are you standing here alone?" The young man looked around. His teammates were nearly 100 yards away. Julie waited. "I stopped thinking about the team." She smiled. "Exactly." She turned to the rest. Speed is valuable. Then she pointed toward Nolan. But being first isn't leadership. The recruits nodded. No yelling, no humiliation. Just another lesson. Watching from nearby, Lieutenant Mercer wrote something on his clipboard. Julie noticed. She pretended she hadn't. 3 days later, another inspection arrived. This time, it wasn't announced. 2 civilian training specialists and a major from brigade headquarters entered her classroom halfway through instruction. The recruits immediately stiffened. Julie didn't. She welcomed them, introduced the lesson, and continued exactly where she had stopped. The observers watched silently. One took notes nearly the entire time. Another occasionally whispered to the major. Julie never altered her pace. If they expected a performance, they weren't getting one. They were seeing her normal class. Afterward, one of the civilians approached. Captain Johnson. Yes? Interesting lesson. Thank you. You spend considerably more time discussing judgment than procedure. I do. Why? Julie answered without hesitation. Because procedures don't make decisions. The man smiled politely. That's an unusual philosophy. It isn't philosophy. She looked toward the recruits leaving the classroom. It's experience. The observers thanked her and left. Julie watched them disappear down the hallway. By now, the inspections no longer felt random. Someone wanted evidence. The question was why. Later that afternoon, she crossed paths with Ethan Mercer outside the headquarters building. He carried another stack of reports beneath one arm. Busy week, he said casually. It has been. Lot of evaluations. Julie nodded. So I've noticed. He smiled. I'm sure it's nothing personal. There was something carefully measured about the sentence. Not mocking. Almost rehearsed. Julie looked directly at him. You seem unusually informed. He gave a small shrug. The command wants the best instructors. So do I. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. Julie finally smiled. I hope they find what they're looking for. She continued walking. Mercer watched her disappear around the corner. He had expected frustration, perhaps even anger. Instead, she'd given him neither. Oddly enough, that bothered him more. The recruits were changing. Julie noticed it in little ways. Complaints during long marches became jokes. Equipment inspections grew cleaner. Fire teams argued less and communicated more. One evening after a field exercise, recruit Emily Carter approached her. Ma'am. Julie looked up from cleaning mud off a compass. What's on your mind? I wanted to ask something. Go ahead. Emily hesitated. When we started, I thought some of this stuff was kind of old. Julie laughed. I noticed. Emily smiled sheepishly. But during yesterday's navigation course, the GPS failure? Yes, I panicked. Julie nodded. That's normal. But then I remembered exactly what you kept repeating. What was that? Emily answered almost automatically. Slow down, look around. The terrain tells you where you are. Julie smiled. And it worked. Emily looked almost embarrassed. I guess I finally understood. Julie handed her the cleaned compass. Technology is wonderful. Emily nodded. But confidence shouldn't require batteries. The young recruit laughed. I think I'm going to remember that one. So do I. As Emily walked away, Julie couldn't help smiling. Moments like that were why she'd accepted the instructor position. Not awards, not promotions. Moments when understanding replaced doubt. Meanwhile, inside brigade headquarters, Lieutenant Mercer sat across from a senior administrative officer. I've reviewed Captain Johnson's evaluations, the officer said. They're excellent. They're based on outdated standards, Mercer replied. That's your opinion. The Army is changing. It is. The officer closed the folder. So why do her recruits consistently score among the highest? Mercer paused. They're disciplined. Exactly. But discipline alone isn't enough anymore. No. The officer leaned back. But neither is technology. Mercer remained silent. Finally, he spoke. I believe we need instructors who represent the future. The officer studied him. You've mentioned Captain Johnson several times. I believe she's holding the program back." After Mercer left the office, the administrator remained seated for several moments. He picked up another document lying beneath the folder. It contained Julie Johnson's combat evaluations. Every commanding officer who had supervised her had written nearly the same sentence. "Demonstrates exceptional judgment under unpredictable conditions." He slowly closed the file. Some lessons, he thought, never became outdated. That evening, Julie sat alone outside the instructor's quarters, watching the sun disappear beyond the tree line. Boots crunched on the gravel behind her. Colonel Harris joined her without saying a word. After a minute, he finally spoke. "The inspections aren't over. I figured. They've requested copies of your lesson plans from the last 6 months." Julie nodded thoughtfully. "That's thorough." "It is." He hesitated. "I don't know who's pushing this." Julie looked out across the parade field, where a few recruits were still practicing drill movements long after duty hours. "I think I do." Harris turned toward her. "You have a name?" She was quiet for several seconds before answering. "No." She gave a faint smile. "Just a strong suspicion." She wasn't interested in accusations. Not yet. But after weeks of carefully timed inspections, endless paperwork, and questions that seemed to follow only one instructor, Julie had begun connecting the dots. If she was right, someone wasn't trying to improve the training program. Someone was trying to convince the Army that she no longer belonged in it. Julie had spent enough years in uniform to know one thing. Battles didn't always begin on a battlefield. Sometimes they began with a signature at the bottom of a report. The announcement came on Monday morning. Every instructor gathered in the briefing room as Colonel Harris stood beside a large map mounted on the wall. 3-day field exercise, he began. No classrooms, no simulations. This is a command evaluation of both recruits and instructors. Lieutenant Ethan Mercer looked pleased. "This will include integrated technology," the colonel continued. "Drone reconnaissance, digital communications, GPS navigation, and live coordination between squads." Mercer nodded confidently. "I've already drafted the operational plan, sir." "I know." Colonel Harris turned toward Julie. "Captain Johnson, you'll supervise Bravo team." Julie simply answered, "Understood." When the meeting ended, Mercer approached her carrying a tablet loaded with maps. "I'd like your input," he said. Julie studied the screen. His plan was impressive. Every movement carefully timed, every checkpoint tracked electronically, every squad connected through digital radios. "You've put a lot of work into this." "I have." He waited. Julie finally asked, "What happens if communications fail?" Mercer smiled. "We have backup frequencies." "And if those fail?" "They won't." "What if GPS drops?" "We'll restore the signal." Julie looked at him calmly. "I'm asking because training isn't about the perfect day." Mercer folded his tablet shut. "It's extremely unlikely that every system fails at once." "You're right," Julie replied. "It is." He seemed satisfied. "But unlikely isn't impossible." She walked away before he could answer. The exercise began before dawn 2 days later. The recruits moved through wooded hills, carrying full packs, while instructors observed from different sectors. Everything started exactly as Mercer had planned. The drones identified routes. Digital maps updated every few minutes. Orders moved instantly between squads. Several recruits quietly admired the efficiency. "This is incredible," recruit Nolan whispered. Julie heard him. "It is. So why don't we train like this all the time?" "Because today's lesson isn't over yet." Nolan frowned, unsure what she meant. By noon, the first complication arrived. Not an accident, not sabotage. A scheduled training event approved by brigade headquarters. Exercise control announced over the radio. Scenario update. Enemy electronic warfare has disrupted satellite navigation. GPS unavailable until further notice. Several recruits instinctively checked their devices. Blank screens. Mercer immediately ordered everyone onto backup communication channels. For a few minutes, everything stabilized. Then another message arrived. Scenario update. Primary and secondary radio networks experiencing interference. Static replaced clear voices. Suddenly, squads could no longer communicate across the training area. Julie watched without panic. She turned toward Bravo team. Maps out. No one argued. Within seconds, paper maps covered a fallen log, while compasses appeared from cargo pockets. Recruit Emily Carter smiled. I think I know why we practice this. Julie returned the smile. I hoped you would. Across the valley, Mercer's command post became increasingly tense. Try Channel 4. No response. Launch another drone. Battery failure. Get me Alpha Squad. Still no contact, sir. Mercer rubbed both hands across his face. His carefully organized timeline was slipping away. Without constant communication, every decision became harder. He stared at the digital map. Nothing updated anymore. For the first time that day, he realized he no longer knew exactly where several squads were located. Bravo team continued moving. Julie never rushed them. She encouraged discussion. What landmark do you recognize? The creek. Good. What else? The ridgeline. Exactly. The recruits slowly rebuilt their awareness using the terrain instead of electronics. They reached the next checkpoint nearly on schedule. Nolan laughed. I honestly thought we'd be lost. Julie answered, people rarely get lost because maps fail. They get lost because they stop paying attention. Late that afternoon, the evaluation staff gathered at the final observation point. One by one, squads began arriving. Bravo team arrived together, tired, dirty, organized. 20 minutes later, Mercer's group finally appeared. Several recruits looked frustrated. Two teams had become separated for nearly an hour before finding each other again. No one had been in danger. The exercise remained completely controlled, but the confusion was obvious. Colonel Harris greeted both instructors. Captain Johnson, nice work. Thank you, sir. He turned to Mercer. Tough afternoon. Mercer nodded stiffly. Yes, sir. Julie said nothing. She had no interest in celebrating someone else's mistakes. As the recruits rested nearby, Mercer quietly walked over. I owe you an answer. Julie looked at him. You asked what happens when everything stops working. She waited. I didn't have one. Julie spoke gently. Technology isn't the problem. No. She glanced toward the exhausted recruits sharing canteens and comparing maps. The problem is believing technology removes uncertainty. Mercer followed her gaze. For the first time since she'd arrived at Fort Anderson, he wasn't looking at her as an outdated instructor. He was looking at someone whose experience had prepared soldiers for a situation his planning hadn't fully considered. It wasn't enough to erase the growing conflict between them, but it was enough to plant the first seed of doubt in everything he thought he already knew. The field exercise became the main topic across Fort Anderson. The recruits talked about it in the dining hall, during morning runs, and while cleaning their equipment. Most of them admired the new technology, but they also admitted something they hadn't expected. When the electronics stopped working, Captain Johnson's team never seemed surprised. Lieutenant Mercer heard those conversations too. Each one felt like another reminder of a lesson he hadn't wanted to learn. Still, he wasn't ready to let the matter go. A week later, an official evaluation team arrived from brigade headquarters. 2 senior officers, a civilian training specialist, and Colonel Harris gathered at the main training field. Mercer saw one final opportunity. Sir, he said to Harris, instead of reviewing lesson plans, why don't we evaluate instruction directly? The colonel looked interested. What do you have in mind? A practical leadership demonstration. The evaluators agreed. Julie was informed only minutes before it began. She simply nodded. That'll work. The challenge appeared straightforward. Each instructor would lead a squad through a casualty evacuation exercise using limited equipment and a strict time limit. Mercer volunteered to go first. His instructions were clear and technically correct. He assigned positions, explained procedures, and reminded everyone to follow the checklist exactly. The squad moved efficiently. Then an evaluator interrupted. Scenario change. Everyone looked up. The casualty has become unconscious. One stretcher strap has broken. Mercer stopped speaking for a second. He looked at the damaged stretcher. Replace it. There isn't another one. He frowned. We'll continue carefully. The squad hesitated. Several recruits waited for new instructions. Precious seconds passed. Finally, they improvised a solution themselves, but the delay had already cost valuable time. When the exercise ended, Mercer knew it hadn't gone well. Julie stepped forward. She never mentioned Mercer's performance. Instead, she knelt beside the broken stretcher. What do we still have? A poncho. 2 rifles. Paracord. She nodded. Good. She looked at the recruits. Tell me how you'd solve it. At first they answered cautiously. Then more ideas appeared. Within moments they had built an improvised litter. Julie smiled. Exactly. The evaluator announced another complication. One member of your squad has twisted an ankle. Julie pointed to recruit Carter. You're in charge now. Carter looked startled. Me? Leadership doesn't wait until you're comfortable. The young recruit took a deep breath, reorganized the team, and continued the evacuation. They crossed the finish line ahead of the required time. When it was over, Julie turned back to Carter. You made one mistake. I know. You forgot to tell your team why you changed the route. Carter nodded. I was thinking too fast. Julie smiled. You'll remember next time. One of the civilian evaluators closed his notebook. Captain Johnson, he asked, why didn't you simply take command yourself? Because someday she will have to. He looked toward Carter. You trusted her to fail? Julie answered without hesitation. I trusted her to learn. The evaluator slowly nodded. I think I understand. The recruits gathered nearby as the officers discussed the results. No one officially declared a winner. They didn't need to. The difference had been obvious. Mercer had relied on procedures. Julie had taught people how to adapt. As the evaluators prepared to leave, Colonel Harris stopped Mercer. Walk with me. The 2 officers crossed the parade field in silence. Finally, Harris spoke. You've spent months criticizing Captain Johnson. I believed I was right, and now... Mercer watched recruits practicing with paper maps and radios at the same time. I still believe the Army needs modern technology. So does she. Mercer sighed. I think I spent so much time proving she was behind the times that I never noticed she wasn't fighting the future. What was she fighting? The idea that machines can replace judgment. Colonel Harris smiled faintly. That's a lesson every officer eventually learns. Mercer lowered his eyes. For the first time since Julie had arrived, he felt something stronger than frustration. He felt respect. And with that respect came an uncomfortable realization. The reports, complaints, and inspections he had quietly encouraged had never been about improving the training program. They had been about proving himself right. Now he wasn't sure he could. The final review board met in a quiet conference room at brigade headquarters. No drills, no recruits, no field exercises. Just papers, evaluations, and long silence between sentences being read out loud. Colonel Harris stood at the front while the panel went through the final assessments of Fort Anderson's training program. When they reached Julie Johnson's file, the room changed slightly, not because of drama, but because of consistency. Every report said the same thing in different words: disciplined instruction, strong leadership, exceptional adaptability training. Recruits consistently outperforming expectations under stress conditions. One of the civilian evaluators flipped through the pages again. She spends more time on decision-making than procedure, he said. Yes, Harris replied. And yet her squads perform better in degraded conditions than any other group we've reviewed. No one answered that immediately. Another officer finally spoke. That suggests her methods are unusually effective. Harris didn't smile. It suggests her methods are realistic. Lieutenant Mercer sat at the back of the room. He had been invited to observe, not participate. For the first time in weeks, he didn't have a report to defend or a position to push. just the outcome of everything he had helped set in motion. He thought about the inspections, the sudden reviews, the careful wording in every complaint he had written. None of them had been direct attacks, not officially. But together they had created pressure. Pressure Julie had never responded to with anger. Only consistency. The board moved on to Mercer's own evaluations. They were also positive, technically. Strong planning, excellent command of systems, highly organized instruction methods. But one line appeared repeatedly in the commentary. Performance decreases significantly when technological systems are degraded or removed. Mercer read it twice without reacting. He already knew it was true. Later that afternoon, Julie was asked to meet with the command staff. She entered the room calmly, hands folded behind her back, the same way she always walked into any evaluation. No hesitation, no anticipation, just readiness. Colonel Harris gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing. "I read your file again," one of the senior officers said. Julie nodded once. "I assume you had questions." "We did," he admitted. "You've been training soldiers the same way for years, and yet your results remain among the highest." Julie answered simply. "I don't train soldiers to pass today's exercise. I train them to survive tomorrow's uncertainty." Another officer leaned forward. "Some of your methods are considered traditional." "They are," she agreed. "And you still insist on them." "I insist on what works when nothing else does." Silence followed. Not disagreement. Consideration. After the meeting, Mercer waited outside the building. He didn't step in front of her. He just spoke when she came out. "Captain Johnson." She stopped. "Yes, Lieutenant." For a moment he didn't answer. The words were harder to say than he expected. "I was wrong about you." Julie didn't respond immediately. She studied him for a long moment, not judging, just observing. "About what part?" "All of it," he admitted. "I thought you were holding things back. I thought you were resisting progress. And now," he looked out across the parade field, "I think I confused progress with certainty." Julie nodded slowly. "That's common." "I didn't mean for the inspections to become what they did," he said quietly. "I know." That answer surprised him. "You know? I've been in this army a long time," she said. "Pressure rarely appears by accident, but it also rarely needs personal hatred to exist." He looked at her more carefully now. "You could have reported me." "Yes, but you didn't." "No. Why?" Julie considered the question for a moment longer than usual. "Because the soldiers under your influence still needed training, and you were still learning." That answer stayed with him longer than any accusation would have. A week later, graduation day arrived. The recruits stood in formation on the parade field in crisp uniforms, their boots newly polished, their movements sharper than when they had first arrived. Julie stood off to the side with the other instructors. She didn't look for attention. She never had. But several recruits looked toward her anyway, not because she demanded it. Because they understood, now more than before, what she had been trying to teach them. The ceremony ended with awards, speeches, and handshakes. Then the formation broke. Soldiers began moving toward buses, assignments, and new units across the country. One by one, they passed Julie. Some nodded, some saluted. A few stopped briefly. "Ma'am," Recruit Carter said, now newly promoted. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not letting us take the easy version of things." Julie gave a small smile. "That wasn't the goal." "What was?" She looked at the departing soldiers. "To make sure you didn't freeze when things weren't easy anymore." Carter nodded as if that made perfect sense. Then she left. When the field finally emptied, Julie remained standing for a while. Wind moved across the grass. Flags snapped overhead. The same sounds she had heard when she first arrived. Colonel Harris approached quietly. "They're going to remember you," he said. "No," Julie replied gently. "They'll remember what they learned when I stopped giving them easy answers." He nodded. "That's the point, isn't it?" "Yes," she said. Then she added, almost to herself, "It always has been." She looked toward the training grounds. New recruits would arrive soon. New mistakes, new lessons, new pressure. And somewhere in those first uncertain days, someone would complain about outdated methods again. Julie almost smiled at the thought, because she knew something they didn't yet understand. The Army didn't change because one generation replaced another. It changed because someone, somewhere, kept teaching soldiers how to think when nothing else worked. She turned and walked back toward the training buildings, not because the past mattered, but because the next group would need the same lesson, just delivered a little differently. And that was the story of Captain Julie Johnson, a veteran who proved that real strength in the military isn't about technology or rank, but about judgment, discipline, and the ability to lead when everything falls apart. If you stayed until the end, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. See you in the next one.